This is another edition of Brewery One-on-One. In this episode, I talked to Jonathan from Slow Down Brewing in Athens, Greece, of all places. We jumped on an hour and about 10-minute Zoom call and just talked shop about brewing, talked a little bit about his past in the beer scene before he moved to Greece to start a brewery, the kind of legal restrictions and weird licensing nuances of owning a brewery in Greece, as well as a pretty hefty tax burden that we do not see here in the States. So I thought this was a really interesting conversation. I hope you enjoy this interview that I had with Jonathan from Slow Down Brewing. Drinking out of this. My brother went to Greece and got me this cup. That's so funny.
Serendipity then. Well done.
Wasn't planned at all.
Nicely done.
Yeah. So you went to school in upstate New York and...
So yeah, I went to school in upstate New York and I was a musician in my previous life and went to Brooklyn to do that, you know, the rock band.
What'd you play?
Thing. Drummer.
Nice.
And then picked up guitar along the way, and that sort of evolved into, as most musicians' paths take, doing education and lessons and working in, you know, kind of rock band school things that have come up over the last 15, 20 years. Was kind of like rock schools, you know, where the kids go in, they're part of a band, but they have private lessons.
Yep.
So anyway, I started doing that for a long time after spending a long time gigging in New York, and did a couple of small tours on our own independent style. And throughout that entire process, also probably not unique, was working as a bartender mostly to finance the musician passion.
A musician that's a bartender? That's crazy.
Never heard of that, right?
I know. Yeah, my girlfriend's from New Jersey, and she's been in bands for a long time, but she used to go into the city and play, and yeah, also bartending at the same time. So
yeah, it's like how I think 99% of rock music was financed for like 25 years. So it's, you know,
sure.
Tips. Your tips were financing the live music scene of New York City, you know.
Yeah. So when did you get into beer?
So I mean, aside from beginning to drink beer, you know, at the age of like 14 or whatever.
Yeah.
But that actually is sort of the beginning of the story as I've thought about it over the last several years to where I am now. My buddies and I were always interested in going to like the furthest, you know, beverage center that we could find to see if they were bringing in anything from Germany or Belgium or whatever. And we weren't like super beer nuts, but we thought it was fun to try to find different beers when we could find different beers. So when I look back, it's like, oh, that's interesting. Like, you know, my friends and I were always sort of trying to understand beer more than just the 24 pack of Bud Light or whatever.
Sure. And then this was what time was this around?
That would have been early 90s.
So not a ton of selection, but getting some imports and.
Yeah, right around then, probably. You know, the brew pub scene was sort of thriving at that point, which was like what I sort of consider the predecessor to the craft scene of the 2000s.
Yeah.
Not what I consider. I mean, from when I look back in history and even just reading about beer history in America. So I think the brew pub scene sort of was influencing the common drinker even at like the beer distributors. So in the early 90s, you find like whatever, Stroh's, Coors, Miller, Schlitz, Pabst. And then by the end of the 90s, I think you started seeing more darker beers. Newcastle was coming in, or that's when like Killian Red hit the scene and everyone went nuts for Irish red beers, you know?
Yeah.
And then 2 years later, I can still remember drinking my first Blue Moon. That was when I was upstate in college. And that was like mind-blowing at the time, right? This like kind of cloudy, weedy beer, but they were putting an orange slice in it at the bar that we used to go to up in Albany, New York. And it was like, well, you know, we kind of went nuts just because every time a different beer hit the scene, I was like, let's go drink that beer, you know?
Yeah. Even when I got into craft beer, which was much later, I remember distinctly Blue Moon, and then they had a variation called Honeymoon that was like eye-opening to me. I was like, oh, this is different than regular beer.
Yeah. Where now I'm quite confident both you and I can make a better Weiss beer, but
yeah,
you know, it's still I'll remember it with, you know, it's got a good place in my memory, you know, like it was important beer for me, you know.
I don't know if you've like looked into the story of Blue Moon, but it's actually like really interesting. And that the guy that created that beer put in some like super sweat equity, go into like the whole orange on a glass thing. Like
Hmm.
he created that. Like he went to bars and made them put oranges
And
on
made
glass.
it.
It was like very interesting. But anyways, I always thought that was kind of cool.
I
So
could
then
believe that its
you
origins were legit, and it was probably a great beer at some point. And of course, as it goes with macro, it just kind of
yeah.
neutralizes over time.
Yeah, sure. So then, what got you into wanting to start a brewery of your own?
Yeah, so fast forward a bunch of years, I guess, and still working through the bartending and being part of I being in New York, being in Brooklyn and in Manhattan, I feel like I was, without even realizing it at the time, but just kind of there on the ground for the evolution of the IPA and the craft scene to kind of be bubbling up on the New York side of things, at least, or the East Coast side of things even. So I was drinking all those beers while I was not working serving those beers. Um, so I feel like I had a pretty good grasp of some of the different styles early on in the early 2000s, which was mostly actually something that I feel like kind of got lost in the mix now. For a little while we were calling it an East Coast IPA, but before the New England IPA to
Yeah,
differentiate it from like the super piney West Coast.
yeah, it was
And
much
it
more
was
like
like,
malt driven, right?
yeah, but super fruit, like compared to maybe not anymore, but then compared to like a West Coast or like a Sierra, it was so fruity. It was a juice bomb. We would actually
Hmm.
kind of, I remember referring to it as like as a juice bomb. It just seemed so orange juicy at the time,
Hmm.
which was probably like, if we're looking back, probably like when Citra started coming into the scene, and they just started overloading
Oh
a
yeah,
West Coast style beer with Citra because it wasn't
yeah.
quite hazy, but it wasn't quite crystal clear either.
Hmm.
And this was probably almost 10 years before Alchemist decided to change the whole world with his New England.
Yeah, you're right.
Anyways, so not to make a whole long story longer, but then to fast forward a few more years, my last job in New York, my wife and I lived in New York for a while, from probably 2013, 14 until 2018, 19 when we came over here. And my job there at the time, I was working at a place in Manhattan that had 25 lines of American craft only. And they had a really cool position in that they're kind of a franchise at this point, but they have a really cool position in one of their locations of a beer manager, which is essentially a regular floor manager with the added responsibility of handling all of the beer inventory and the beer ordering. And that was like a super deep dive into the other layers of craft beer because I was dealing with distribution, but also with brand reps and even brewers that were coming in and repping their own product. Because that was at the time when a lot of the breweries that are currently going well in Brooklyn and in New York were just getting started. So a lot of the brewers were just kind of peddling their own stuff at the time. So we had 25 lines, and the directive of keeping a balanced list um, of styles to serve. So
So,
predicting what to buy and what to have backed up so that we would have a nice balanced flow across 25 lines was a fun game to play.
so
And
just
that
real quick, how long were you there for, and what was the name of the place?
place is called Barcade. Um,
Barcade.
yeah,
I've been there.
they've got a location in New Jersey, in Jersey City. Um, they've got a couple locations in New York. They've expanded quite a bit too. They're in
Did,
Pennsylvania. They're
did you know
Detroit.
the
They're
guys at uh shoot in Brooklyn? They're like the big brewery in Brooklyn. Why am I spacing?
other half.
Other half. Yeah, did you know those guys?
Yeah, I don't know if they would remember me at this point, but I recall those were the type of guys that would come in. They came in themselves in the early days with cans of beer and were like, "Yo, we're opening a brewery in Brooklyn, or we just
Okay,
opened a
okay.
couple months ago." And they've got that real ground up story. I remember meeting those guys. They came in to sell us beer, and So from the one end of having to learn as many styles as I could well enough so that I knew I was buying a quality product and keeping a nice balance to the tap list, I spent all my time when I wasn't working researching all these different styles of beer so that I felt like I was doing a good job, I guess. And then when all these people would come in with different samples, brewers particularly, I'd end up talking their ear off more than they would sell me their products. I just had so many questions about why this particular beer was this way, and how it's made. And then the further I got along that path, it just inevitably brought me to thousands of YouTubes, such as yourself, actually, but on the homebrew side. People back then, it was like, YouTube was really full with homebrew tutorials type of things.
Oh, yeah. I remember distinctly those videos.
I gouged on them and watched them over and over again. Some of them, some of them were really, really informative and good. Some of them are channels I still watch now too. Which has been interesting to watch YouTube progress to where like your style channel now is coming at it from a little bit of a commercial insight, where I think 15, 20 years ago, it was still homebrewers being like, this is how you make beer. Now that kind of leveled up to like, this is how you make beer after you open a brewery. Right?
Yeah.
So I like deep dove into that really from a perspective of like, this is going to help me understand, what a wit is or what a sati is or whatever, all kind of crazy different styles, or just what a porter is. Why is a porter not a stout? That age-old, never-ending conversation. And then from there, it was like, okay, I felt like mentally I had grasped everything. I was watching videos on fermentation and yeast health. I was watching videos that like you should be knowing if you're brewing beer or watching if you're brewing beer. So then kind of on a whim, I was like, why have I never just brewed a beer, And so I bought a kit. My wife and I were just sitting around in our apartment at the time, and I was like, this is funny. Like, I feel like I can describe to people exactly how to brew beer, and I've never brewed beer. It's pretty stupid. It's like my job to sell beer, and I'm drinking beer practically 24 hours a day. So I went online to Northern Brewer. That was actually before Budweiser had bought them, who now I think they've subsequently gone independent again, and bought their like basic everything you need in a box homebrew kit. And I think it was included with 2 or 3 recipe kits, and it had two vessels. What do you call the carboys?
Yeah.
And it had a simple pot and a little. It even came with like a spoon to stir. It was funny, all these little things. A lot of the stuff I still have. I still have those carboys. I still have the funnel that I use. I still have the strainer from it. It's really quality, like double strainer. I still use it at the brewery sometimes for different things.
Nice.
So yeah, it was extract kits. Threw a couple of those together. The first one was a brown that they had, it was a Northern Brewer, something slobber, caribou slobber, actually, I think.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and it turned out well enough. I mean, we drank the hell out of it. It was only like a case worth of beer or whatever. And then
so you jumped into home brewing and just went full bore and started brewing a bunch of different styles.
I thought like I opened it up like a kid, at Christmas, because there was all this cool stuff inside, and I was like, this is gonna be fun. I was still just thinking of it like this will be a cool, experience, kind of put some things in place, hands on, whatever. But I remember pouring the extract in and stirring it, and it was like some things started going like, and I was like, this is awesome. This is going to be awesome. It just smelled so sweet and good. And then we opened the hops up, and yeah, just a couple of things I think clicked in my brain that I wasn't even at the moment thinking anything about doing what I'm doing now, but I was like instantly hooked as a homebrewer. I was like, this is going to be a fun hobby to do, and went through a bunch of different batches. Not even a ton. I could definitely tell you that there are people there are homebrewers who homebrewed a lot more than I homebrewed before taking the plunge that I've taken.
I have a very similar story. Yeah, I homebrewed probably less than 20 batches before I got into brewing beer professionally at the first brewery that I worked at, and I just got the itch. I was like, I got to do this. So you homebrewed for a little bit, and then what made you decide to turn it into a career or profession?
Couple of things might have come together there. I was I didn't feel young. I'm not old, but I didn't quite feel young anymore. And I knew music was kind of coming to an end as a career prospect for me, because I was, like I had mentioned a little earlier, it evolved into teaching, and I was doing some kind of restaurant gigging, doing sort of jazz stuff, all of which I really enjoyed very much. I really enjoyed teaching and playing the gigs and stuff, but I saw quickly, and because I knew other dudes who were doing it, that it was kind of a loop. And I was like, this is going to be it, the same month for the next like 15 years. I'm going to have the same conversation with the same 6-year-old. As rewarding as it is to see someone who doesn't know how to play drums within a few lessons, like knocking out a drum beat, it's super
Yeah.
rewarding. But I was like, how many times am I going to really love that moment, And because I guess it came to music from, I started playing drums when I was like 3 or 4 years old. So I had all these dreams, growing up in the 80s and 90s, like I'm going to go on tour, I'm going to be in a band. And so it was like, if it's not going to be that, do I really want to evolve it into just kind of a day job sort of thing, And I didn't really want to. Something in me told me that I didn't want to do that. So it was like a crossroads of like, what else should I do now? I'm young enough at the time to kind of pick a new path. What should it be? And it was an open question. Brewing wasn't the first thing that popped into my mind necessarily. And there was simultaneously though, I had just bottled up a batch of a porter that I soaked oak chips in a Scotch whiskey, and then threw that into the carboy and did a Scotch oak aged porter. And I had just bottled that up, and I thought it was delicious, but I'm try to be humble enough to be like, I don't know, I think my beer is good, but I'm going to drink the hell out of it. So I went up to a local brewery. This is out in the suburbs of Long Island. This guy that had just opened, and just to meet a friend there who was coming out from Brooklyn at the time. We were going to hang out for a couple hours. So I brought a couple bottles to give to my friend as just sharing beer or whatever. And I had him out in the car. I'll make this story not too long. So we're sitting at the bar, and he's got this giant bartender. He's this huge man, super nice guy. And I'm sitting there chatting with my friend, and I see the brewer come out, who's the owner of this tiny, tiny brewery called Po' Boy Brewery in Long Island, in Port Jefferson. And on the wall, he's got like, I don't know how many ribbons of homebrew and competitions that he's, ribboned in different levels at, which I was like, wow, fairly impressive. Anyway, so I overhear them chatting, and I somehow understand that the big guy, the bartender, is a BJCP judge. And I was like, guys, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you clearly know how to brew beer. You got all these ribbons on your wall. You're a literal judge of local competitions. If it wouldn't be crazy, like, would you taste this beer that I have in the car just to give me some notes? Just wonder what you think. So I go get the beer, and their first reaction, both of them almost simultaneously, were like, "You got to put this into a competition, dude. Like, it's great." Great in the sense that like it's competition worthy. Submit it, get some different judges. And I felt that was kind of a boost. That was one of the first boosts that I was like, that would be interesting to like make beer, like on a consistent level, whatever, And that beer did do well. It took its category, and then there was like an overall beer category. And so that was a second boost, that the beer actually ended up doing well in the category. And we're not talking about a huge competition, right? So
yeah.
Fast forward a few years, where we had come over to Greece, and I was still homebrewing here on the island where the brewery is, and I brewed a saison because I enjoy saison maybe more than most styles. And I think that was the first beer for me personally where I brewed it and drank it, and the first sip, my own brain was like, "Whoa, this is good!" Like above my previous attempts at beer. So I actually submitted that too, with a similar intent of like, just give me some feedback. Am I crazy that I think this is good, or what? And then that did well. And that was like the last boost where I was like, so similar to like, I hadn't even homebrewed all that much. I haven't even done that many competitions in the sense of just trying to get feedback. It was enough probably in conjunction with me being a kind of moment in life of like, what do I do next? That was enough for me to be like, to start putting a plan together for what has subsequently evolved many times already since we opened. But yeah, to start brewing, I guess professionally would be the way to say it. Sounds weird to say it out loud, like I brew professionally, but
Yeah. So what year did you open?
so we opened in 2019.
Oh, okay.
But it took a long time for the whole thing to really fall completely into place. So I didn't start brewing in 2019. We opened with a kind of a brew pub concept, in that there's a 2-floor building. The little brewery's on the first floor. The second floor, we opened a bar with a kitchen. I've got experience working in kitchens and whatnot too. So bartending was my only service experience.
A lot of parallels here. Yeah.
Yeah, I was watching.
My,
I was watching your previous one-on-one with a wine guy down in Texas, and I heard you mentioning your experience and how, what did you say, food has beaten you or something like that?
yeah. In so many words. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I started nodding my
yeah.
head, and I was like, I got you fully, bro.
Yeah, because I mean that was my first career at like 14. I decided I was going to be a pastry chef, and so I went down that path, and then got into the restaurant industry, and just realized that that was not what I wanted to do with my life. And then having dealt with restaurants for as long as I have, I just, from a business perspective, have no interest in dealing with it again. But I still like love food and love cooking and everything. So it's kind of this, I'm kind of, yeah, torn between the two things. So
Totally hear you.
so before, I have a question about like what it kind of the nuances of opening a brewery in Greece. But before that, can you just give me an overview of like your brewery system, and like what are you brewing on, and kind of
Mhm.
what's the model now?
Yeah, so tied together with the initial concept of a kind of brew pub, where we would be, the first idea was to brew enough beer to serve at the bar, where we had 7 taps. And so I started, in combination with me feeling like a really green new brewer. I didn't want to get in over my head too quickly, because I knew actually, you said the good phrase earlier today. I was watching it. I knew that I didn't know what I don't know. So before I got into some kind of 5 barrel system or something, I was like, let me make all my mistakes and go through this learning curve that's definitely going to be a challenge, on something small, and have the advantage to be able to serve on site, so we can kind of push the beer out without having to get involved with distribution. Because my previous experience with being a beer buyer, I saw how complicated and how much volume you really need to have if you're going to go through distribution. So I have basically a super big homebrew, 3-vessel homebrew system was kind of how I designed it. I found a company in Singapore through some contacts here, some bigger microbreweries here, and went back and forth with them, telling them what I thought I'd want. Again, all the while knowing like there's probably things that I don't know that I should be asking for right now. But so I set up an
So
HLT, oil, and like mash and lauter time.
what size is it? Because I see a picture on your website.
It's essentially a single barrel system. I can boil
Oh wow, it
safely.
looks a lot bigger.
It does
That's
look bigger. I can get like into the boil kettle. I can safely boil 140 to 145 liters. And I can,
okay.
so the two, if you see on the one side, probably the photo, I think you're probably looking at, there's 2 smaller fermenters.
Yep.
And subsequently I've added, so those are, I can ferment about 130, 135 liters in those to get to about 120 liters of product at the end of that.
Okay.
And I've also added basically a 250-liter conical next to those 2. So I can double batch into that, which also works as my BBT. So instead of getting a flat bottom BBT, I decided, since I got it, this probably goes to your future questions on opening a brewery here in Greece, which is interesting. So it was required to have a final vessel or a BBT that has the sight glass, because we have basically like a customs and duties officer comes every time you want to package beer. They come and they measure through the sight glass what's in the BBT, and
Oh,
then
wow.
that is calculated to what consumption tax, called a consumption tax. It's basically like a special alcohol tax.
Yeah, yeah.
So that gets
And
calculated on like what tax you're going to pay on the volume that you have.
and they manually come and audit that every time you want to package.
Yeah.
Wow, that seems like wildly inefficient.
So
Uh,
it's unbelievable.
yeah, because we have, I mean, yeah, we have the same exact regulation here in the States with, I mean, it's basically just uh, what's called it's a tax determination vessel, and so it volumetrically has to align with how much beer is in there. And once the beer is in there, that's the taxable volume. But it's just self-reported, so I can't imagine how many. I mean, there's like 10,000 breweries in the country. I can't imagine going to 10,000 breweries every single time they're packaging. That's crazy.
It's totally mad. And here, like in Athens, where there's just a couple of breweries, they can't keep up. So they have figured out some kind of system where either they show up on that day or they self-report, but then you still have to get like an approval for whatever you packaged before you can ship it anywhere.
Sure.
So then the customs, they will show up after packaging and count every can, every bottle, every keg, and make sure it lines up with the volume you said you packaged. And you're not allowed to move any of that. And if it's like a, like a half fill, because that happens sometimes on the canning line or whatever, they'll ask you like, where's this 200 ml, or if you like crack a couple beers because you just like had a long day, you got to like report that somehow. I know breweries that have like a cash register essentially, and they'll go and like ring up 3 beers just so that it's on a piece of paper somewhere that these 3 beers existed once, and that we drank them.
Yeah, that's
It's
crazy.
crazy inefficient, crazy.
So what are some other hurdles that you had to face when you were opening a brewery in Greece?
There was plenty, I guess, but there was some pretty specific requirements of what needs to be in the layout, which sounds pretty reasonable. And probably in most countries and states, there's a basic requirement of needing this or that thing. Some of it just seemed absurd. We needed like a specific room for where employees would change their clothes to go into the brewery.
Okay.
Which is like, I work, it's a tiny place. It's like, I don't even know how many square feet. I could tell you, is it 100 square feet? It's tiny, So it's like, seriously, you want me to take up like, each square foot is extremely valuable to me. Now I need to make like a closet essentially, so that theoretically people could go in and change their clothes and come back out into the same space they're standing in. Yeah, it's got to be there. All right.
Wow.
So it exists, and I essentially use it as a kind of closet / officey thing. But I could definitely be using it for something way more valuable than just a box of nothingness. Other things were pretty reasonable. It needs to have like a dry storage for my malts. Needed to have a bathroom. All right, I can understand those things.
But no like weird licensing thing. Like, is there anything that was like
one
any?
thing that is, well, yeah, one thing that definitely affected us, and I'm still kind of going over it and over it and over it, is that we had this intention of doing, what we really wanted to do was a tap room, what we would call a tap room in the United States, which is a brewery that takes advantage of some square footage within its premises that's kind of dead space. That's how I understand the value of a tap room at a brewery, at a production facility. They say, you know what, that corner over there, it can fit 5 taps and like a couple of tables, and it'll make more money per square foot than it is right now, because it's just like got a bunch of empty cans or something stuck there or whatever. Because you're under the same rent, you're under the same licenses, whatever, no big deal. Here, you're not allowed to serve on premises. So like a production facility can't sell retail. So the back door around that, which seemed clever, but now is definitely kind of a bit of a weight on our shoulders, that we just rented two places that are next to each other,
Yeah.
or in our case, above and below each other. But that means you've got two rents, right? Which you can rationalize and say, well, combined, are they about what the rent would be for a regular brewery? Maybe. But it's just, well, I can go into like employment and the labor laws here and how expensive it is to have an employee in any place. But anyway, so we wanted to basically open a tap room, and then we were like, all right, it's not going to be a tap room, but we can do it like this. So it'll be a little bit like a brew pub, which is a funny thing too. There is such a thing as a brew pub here that's got a minimum production of 1,000 liters, and you can only sell on premises if you're a brew pub. You're not allowed to distribute at all. So if you're a tiny brew pub on like a seasonal spot, doing one batch of 1,000 liters, but the craft idea is to have a couple of different styles of beer. Like, I'm not going to get rid of 5,000 liters in like 2 months,
Oh,
So
do you mean you have to brew 1,000 liters at a
yeah,
time?
you're not allowed to brew less than 1,000 liters,
What?
and you're not allowed to distribute. So it's like,
That's crazy.
only brew one beer, basically. That's what that means, So we
Yeah.
didn't do a brew pub license. So what we ended up doing was getting a brewery license and like a cafe bar license, what here they would call a cafe bar license, which on that end, things are easier. You don't have to worry about liquor licenses and stuff here. It's much easier than in the States, where I've opened businesses as well in the States and gotten liquor licenses. And I know that is a zoo with communities and towns and states and whatever. Here, the cafe bar gets to serve whatever the hell it wants. It can serve rum, it can serve beer, it can serve whatever, coffee.
Oh, cool. Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So you get one license, you're a coffee shop essentially, and you can serve anything. So that is one thing actually that is fairly easy. So we ended up opening two businesses, is the point there. And the brewery took longer than the bar for several reasons. The bureaucracy here is just really unfamiliar with microbrewing and craft brewing. So we had to like walk the municipality through everything ourselves. Like, they didn't know what we were asking for the most part.
Right.
Even though it was already happening in different parts of the country, they don't really communicate with each other very well, the different municipalities. So we were like, we want to open a brewery. And they're like, here's all this stuff. And it was designed for like, like an InBev sized Heineken brewery. And like, I don't
Yeah,
want
like a
that.
giant manufacturing facility. Yeah.
And the long and short of that is the whole law and regulation of brewing in this country is basically just copy pasted right out of like Heineken lobbies. Like, this is how you're going to regulate us. Here you go.
Yeah.
Like 50 years ago or more. Actually, more. It literally has the name of the last king of Greece is on the law.
You're still being governed by the last king of Greece. That's awesome.
Yeah. Right. So all the microbreweries here in Greece have to maneuver their way through an antiquated concept of brewing, in the sense that like no one that I know is trying to become Heineken. I don't think there's any room left on the planet for another startup to become Heineken, right?
So real quick, this stream's going to end in about 2 minutes, but one question before we jump off, and then I'll send you a link and we'll jump back on. How many craft breweries are there in Greece total? Do you know?
That's an interesting question and answer. There's something on the lines of like 50 to 60, but that's a nuanced answer in that the vast majority are what here in Greece they call nomad, or we would call gypsy brewing. Or really contract brewing, is to put it the most simple way. So I would say like 90% of the labels you would see in a bottle shop are contract brews. And there's just a handful of production facilities in the country.
Huh. That's interesting. So is there are there like large contract brewing facilities that just do that, or are they just are they like piggybacking off of places like you?
Yeah, most of them are breweries that are like most of them are about 5 barrel systems with like 10 barrel fermenters. and they just have room in their schedule and coordinate with all these different contract brewers to make their beer. So a lot of the beer comes from one specific brewery that we know quite
Okay,
well.
that makes more sense than like 1,000 labels at like 5-barrel batches. That seems like really efficient or inefficient.
It is sort of inefficient, and I think it sort of works against itself to some degree as far as moving the craft. It's got its pluses and minuses. The breweries that want to push their own brand and label, I think, are getting a little bit in their own way by filling up their schedule with all these contracts.
Yeah. Yeah. Before I lose this train of thought. So you were saying that like the majority of beers that you see on the shelves are contract brewed from other companies and generally from like a larger facility.
Yeah, not huge. Like I said, most of the microbrewery craft breweries that do exist that are actual facilities. I've visited a handful of them, probably not all of them, certainly not all of them, but they're all probably at least about a 5-barrel brew house, with either 500, I go between barrel and liters.
Yeah.
But like a 500 liter, which is basically a 5-barrel brew house with either matching fermenters or the double, so they can double brew or double batch into those.
Cool.
And some of them,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
some of them have caught on that, like some of them started, with matching fermenters. That's one of the mistakes one of the things I didn't know when I was setting up mine, for example, as I got I set it up with a sort of matching volume. And so the third vessel that we brought in, that's my BBT, that makes more sense now because I can double brew into that. And had I calculated that from the beginning, I'd be in a much better place right now than I currently am in, as far as being able to just increase my production volume without having to figure out how to now fund some kind of volume expansion, either on the fermenters that I have or get another one.
Got it. So what's like the beer landscape like in Greece? What's the craft beer scene like? Is it on par with like the American craft beer scene? Is it 10 years behind? What's going on there?
Most things in Greece are literally 10 years behind the United States.
Okay.
I say that jokingly, but also seriously. I've noticed that throughout my life. It sort of trickles down and gets to here. And one of the things that I thought I was foreseeing before coming here was that the craft trend seems to follow the same path. Whenever it hits a new market, it's going to take the same basic path. So like if you lived through the US market from like 2005 to 2015, let's say, you have a pretty good idea of like what any craft beer market's going to do when it's new in a new place. And I don't think I'm all that wrong about that, actually. I think like just through the internet, watching along what's going on in Britain, it looks like it's sort of doing the same thing. And I think I see it happening here, even in styles. Like it's IPA that makes everybody go crazy. And then sooner than you think, people think they're already bored with IPA, so they start trying to do lagers. And then that's, everyone thinks, oh, now we're just going to do lagers. And within like a year, right back to IPAs. And it just kind of does this thing. And I'm doing it upwards because it is an upward growth, as slow and sluggish as it kind of may be, and it might go through its own dips. I think it's year on year in every market for craft brewing. There's more consumers coming into the fold every year, even though it might slow down relative to where it was the year before or the year before that. I don't think that there's any data that shows that craft brewing has shrunk. It's just slowing its growth.
Yeah. The weird thing, I had a video that I put out about like why breweries are closing and got like more engagement than any other video I put out. Just like everybody has an opinion, and I've been in this industry for over 10 years, so I can be pretty jaded. But A lot of people see that number like, oh yeah, craft beer as a whole is growing, which is true. But I think the big issue isn't necessarily that the category is growing, is that the number of people that are in the category, the breweries that have opened, like that slice of the pie gets smaller and smaller. And it just like the business model becomes less and less sustainable, especially if you open, like you were saying, like if you open a production brewery that's supposed to be this like regional production brewery, like the chances of it making it is pretty slim right now. The market's pretty unforgiving for that. There's so many people in it, but yeah, on the whole, like more and more people are coming into craft beer and drinking beer for sure.
Yeah, I think you're probably spot on the business side of it, the production side of it. So there's that, isn't that a funny duality that there's more and more craft drinkers, which ironically, maybe, I don't know if it's ironic or not, but subsequently anyway, make it more and more difficult to be a brewer because
Yeah,
because it's harder to make it through the noise on both ends. There's so many breweries, and then there's even more drinkers every year, and so there's this noise happening out there. And I think building a brand of anything probably has all of those same pitfalls and difficulties of just standing out in the noise of whatever the trend is at the time.
yeah,
Because building a brand of something that's not trendy is probably not that interesting or worthwhile. So
yeah. My feelings on it are, again, like I have a pretty, you know, uh, jaded perspective, but I think that the increased competition, I mean, not even just like, oh, it's competitive, like it's a mature market. So like as all markets go, they get, a bunch of people get into it. The good people outlast the bad people. Are not a judgment of
yeah.
character, just like the good versus bad businesses. And I think the explosion and the exponential growth in the early 2010s kind of kind of overshadowed the fact that a lot of these business models are, one, they're very difficult, but two, they're not like amazing from a like profitability standpoint. And so, you know, the building a 50,000 barrel production facility and like just running off slim margins, selling kegs for $150 and just like banking on large distribution, and like that model is it's almost non-existent, like from as far as like starting that from scratch. And
Yeah.
so I think it just like shines a light on that, where a lot of people now need to, shrink the size, come back to bring people into the tap room with the on-site sales. So that has fundamentally changed, I think, in at least in the States. But so as far as like the beer scene there, do you see any, like it's good insight, I would assume, if you lived through that period in the United States of craft
Yeah,
beer growth.
I was kind of rolling the dice on almost time traveling in a way. Like if I got
Yeah.
here in 2017, 18, I'd be here at the moment, to try to catch that wave. And we were pretty spot on in 2019. Like between 2018 and 19, it was like someone opened the floodgates. There was like 3 craft breweries that no one really knew about in 2018, and 2019 when we opened the bar, and unfortunately didn't simultaneously open the brewery and get brewing right away, so that we have a few years under our belt already, essentially. It was like we opened the 7 taps without our own beer, so we're like, oh man, what are we gonna, we know that there's a couple of breweries out there, we'll get their kegs on. And like within a month of opening, there was just so many beers to choose from. There was all these beers started hitting the scene from left and right. And every week it was another IPA over here and another IPA over here. It was the same story that I was like, oh, look, it's actually exactly what I thought.
Yeah, it's happening.
Yeah, there's IPAs everywhere. And then quickly, the part that did surprise me though is how much of it was contracted, because I didn't expect that I didn't see that happen in the States or in New York, right? People were opening their own breweries and trying to make it as the production side of it. And
Yeah.
it seems like the Greek homebrewer entrepreneur caught on to contract brewing in a way that I just did not see coming. So there is a kind of saturation occurring at the moment, which might be equivalent to the 2010 to 15 period of the United States, which I think means we still got a long way to go. Like we're going to go through a little bit of a contraction probably over the next couple of years, like 2018, 19 in the States. But I feel like right now the States is sort of finding its way. In reference to what you're saying, there's going to be people who are going to get washed out, but because consumption is continuing to grow, like the industry is not going to go away, just going to wash out some of the producers, and there'll still be business models for the flexible mind who can come up with the model that's going to work in the contemporary moment. And on this side, interestingly, as a producer, I've got to compete with contractors, which was like, okay, I didn't expect that. Like if there's, if in 2 or 3 years, there's 20 new production facilities and you're one of them and you're trying to, on a friendly way, we're all quite friendly with each other, which is another topic to discuss, but that's the really good part of the scene. But you go, okay, I'm one of 20, I can stand out, I can push my brand, I can get out there, I can get on taps or get into bottle shops and things. But like suddenly I'm like one label of 70. That was unexpected. That was not part of the business model of the growth model of trying to increase volume year on year or whatever, and keeping up with the neighbors, so to speak.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, anybody with a couple grand and a graphic artist friend has
you got a brewery. So one, how's the business been? Like, are you seeing growth? Are you happy with where it's at? And then two, what are your plans for the business, or what were your plans for the business in the future?
Yeah, so that's been an interesting, just on being a small business operator, that's been a rough education. Even though we've opened businesses and closed businesses, it's like every time you do it, there's things that you still don't see coming. So we opened it as a kind of a brew pub on a very remote island, which is where the brewery is. And it's a seasonal.
I'm gonna look it up real quick.
Yeah,
look at the map.
It's all the way in the Eastern Aegean, off the coast of Turkey, really more than it is off the coast of Greece. And its season is very short as far as tourism goes, shorter than most other places. Anyways, the long story there, short, is that we decided to let go of the bar. Last summer was the first summer that we didn't run it. We broke our lease, in other words, on the bar side of it, but kept the brewery, and subsequently opened a tap room, like a satellite tap room here in Athens. So now the brewery is on the island and the tap room is here in the city, which comes along, of course, with its inefficiencies and its problems. And honestly, my wife and I talk about it every day, all day long. It's like all we discuss is, did we do it the right way? What did we not do the right way? And whatever. And what are we going to do tomorrow, next week, next month, 6 months from now? How are we going to go? And we've got different things in our minds. So the tap room here is going okay. We're only a year into that. So if you take that as an isolated sort of case, it's only a year in. We want to get to year 2, 3 and see if it's really going to have legs. It's certainly helpful that we have our own point of sale, though. So we make good margins on whatever we're selling out of the tap room here. And whatever we're not selling out of the tap room here, I'm putting into key kegs or poly kegs that I can put through distribution or direct sell to some other, friends bars that have tap systems. And that's already hit its wall in that there are only a few places here that really are set up to do craft on tap for the time being. I think that's going to change in the next couple of years. But so our first priority for 2024 is to set up a really small ability to do some canning, which you definitely have experience. I saw your video on that, doing small batch canning. There's lots of different options of how to skin that cat. But with the specific intention of unloading our excess volume, until the tap room, knock on wood, gets to where we're basically able to push all of our product through our own taps, we want to be able to then package that into a format that I can distribute to more locations. Because if it's only in kegs, I've got only a handful of people that I can sell that keg to. But if it's in cans, there are more bottle shops and more like sort of taverns, let's say, different kinds of points of sale. It's not just a craft beer, you know, that
So
would.
what's your annual production, your capacity limit?
The upper limit of it, if I max it out, right? So that's basically like the two little guys can do per batch, let's say 120, 1 barrel, 2 barrels, and then 2 barrels. So like, let's say 4 barrels a month. Unless I really push it, I could do 8 barrels a month. And that has a little bit to do with the going back and forth. Although, as a side note there, I've developed a couple of kvike recipes, which really helped on my tiny system to increase my capacity. Because if I go down to the island, to the brewery for a little bit of an extended time, in other words, let's say 6 weeks, I can like knock out a round of kvike recipes and get them out of the tanks, and then get some more traditional recipes or yeast in there to do, you know, a good 14 or 20-day fermentation. And in that same month, almost in the same amount of time, doubled the output, thanks to the kvike at, you know, 35 degrees C, cranking out in 48 hours, you know, and essentially let it condition if it needs to condition, and let it condition in the keg. Because we're serving it on our own tap system, essentially, I can manage anything that I might need to tweak along the way. So, you know, let's say if I was really flooring it and I was doing 8 barrels a month, 8 times, what is that, 24 barrels a year? Not a ton.
No, 8 barrels a month would be like.
Oh yeah,
it's almost 100 barrels.
Yeah, right. 8 times 12, right? So no. Yeah, almost 100 barrels, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say 20 barrels, man.
Yeah, that's not right. That would be 3 months. So, you know, that's really pushing it, but it's not too much. I mean, I enjoy the hell out of brewing. So the few times that I have gone down there for those kind of like quick cycles, like knock out a round of kvikes and then knock out a couple of my more older recipes, I guess. I don't know the right way to say that. It's been fun. 6 weeks, tiring, long days. Similarly, when I'm down there, it's a full one-man show. Like the company is a duo, my wife and I, handling 1,000 different positions, right? But when it comes to the brew house, it's essentially a one-man show. But it's small enough.
What's your I guess what was your goal for the brewery initially, and then what are your goals? Have they changed at all? Like what do you ideally, what's the, you know, 5-year goal?
Yeah, it's a great question that I think I'm still probably trying to answer entirely, but
me too. Yeah, sorry.
Right.
I don't have all the answers either. I'm just
well, that's an interesting challenge in owning any business, in realizing at the right moment, being flexible enough to realize at the right moment what you need to evolve and adapt to, and understanding whether you're adapting because you're like break glass in an emergency, or you're adapting because you're moving in an advantageous, you know, aware way. And sometimes you can't tell, like, is this just because I'm back into a corner that I'm doing this, or is this because it's a strategically good idea?
Yeah.
And those just take a lot of talking, and it's good to have a partner if you can, or at least someone to sound off on, because you can get stuck in a real dead space in your brain. So we started it with the initial idea was produce enough beer to serve at this seasonal bar, and then in the in-between seasons, use that to establish the brand as a small batch, limited availability, you know, quality beer, but you can't find it all the time. I wanted initially to lean into the limited availability reputation that I knew would take some patience, but if I do pull off making quality beer, which I think I'm so far doing okay at anyways, you know, the idea was that when you saw the logo, you would go like, that's a good beer. You know, I don't often see it, and when I do see it, I'm going to buy it on tap or whatever, because it doesn't come around all that often, because it's this little place and from this little place, you know. But that has had to evolve now. So that goes along with like wanting to can to try to boost the brand a little bit faster than we had initially intended to, which simultaneously should, I would think, help to drive traffic to the tap room here in the city in Athens. As the brand grows, I'm hoping that'll make people realize that there is a tap room where there's 8 of these beers on tap at all times or whatever. And then the next step after that would be to expand my capacity a little bit as much as I can in the tiny footprint that I have before, or to lead me to the necessary plunge of like, we might have to move this whole thing to another spot to go. Just even, right now I could probably double the capacity of those 2 little fermenters by just doing a kind of cylindrical extension on top, which I discussed with the builders that built the thing. We kind of already came up with a basic scheme of how to do that. But then if I want to expand after that, it would be pretty tight to do in that space. And that's like a whole other thing. Because when you move locations, you're starting from scratch from the licenses and whatnot. It's like you're just opening a brewery again. So I want to try to push that off as much as I can.
So if all of your bills are paid and you make enough money to eat, would the goal be just like grow the brand slowly and just continue to brew beer on that small scale, or do you have aspirations to have like this bigger thing ever?
I think realistically and emotionally too, right? You gotta want to know who you are and who you want to be in 5 and 10 and 15 years. If I get to like a 5-barrel system with 4 to 6 10-barrel fermenters, that's huge in my mind right now.
Yeah.
But if I can get to like a 5-barrel brew house with a couple of fermenters, that's gonna satisfy the Greek market, but also give me the ability to start punching out into Europe in general, but still maintaining that limited availability, small batch sort of image. That'd be nice, if in like 10 years from now, I'm able to keep brewing beer, but at a steady capacity where it's flowing out, that would be cool to me. I don't really think I want to. I've been on brew days at big places, with 1,000-liter brew houses or 2,000-liter brew houses, and they're just cranking beer out, and it's amazing. But when I'm step back from that day, I'm like, these guys got here like 4 a.m. Like, I don't want to get here at 4 a.m. and like do double shifts and stuff. Like, it's cool, it's really great, but that's not why. It's not why we moved to Greece to do that. If I were to do that, I would have just gotten a bunch of investors and a big loan and just dug into Brooklyn or something.
Is it more expensive to operate in Greece?
I would have to think it is on just on the taxation side, and like I mentioned earlier, the employment. There's pretty strict minimum wage and minimum hours laws here, so you can't really hire like a part-time, swing shift type of thing. And along with that, because we have kind of what we would call it's a public medical insurance. I'm trying to remember how we call it in English, but nonetheless, the employer pays into the fund, like parallel to the wage.
Yeah.
And that's locked in too. So an employee is really, really expensive here.
Yeah.
To have an employee.
Yeah, just like Medicare, Medicaid, or whatever, taxes and Social Security.
Yeah, but in the States, if I remember correctly, how my paychecks work, like there was a cut out of my paycheck that went into Social Security.
Yeah.
Here, it's like you got to give me my paycheck as an employee, and then you're going to pay the government my take, like my input for the health fund. So the employer is kind of paying in 2 directions for this one employee. Yeah,
it's split in the States where like the employer pays half, the employee pays half. But I can imagine that is, with those, not being able to hire a part-time person or, I don't even, what is the minimum wage?
It's not, it's like, man, my wife's much more on top of these things than I am, but I want to say it's something like 250 a week, 350 a week, which sounds like peanuts in the United States, but here, most your average monthly earner is making something like 700 euros a month, in realistic terms, like whatever the news wants to tell you about how Greece is this economic miracle of 2024. Most people are not making enough money to cover their actual baseline expenses. And most tiny businesses, as we are, the employee is almost definitely making more money than the owner, just because of the way that the wage structure is worked out. So we do have gas in the car and food in the fridge, but to really work this business model to where, not even to where we can go on vacation, let's say, but to where I have enough money to like invest in a labeler is like, man, that's just trying to line up all these years and squeeze out that extra little bit of profit margin. Because the little bit of profit margin on beer, at least we are selling direct, so we have that retail markup, but that's at the moment getting us to be pretty much at zero, which is within a year or two, that's pretty okay. I'm satisfied at the moment that we aren't like in negative constantly, but we're right on that edge. Any little tweak in the month could be a negative month, and that's part of the challenge.
I hear that.
Yeah.
What does a beer go for out there?
It's pretty expensive, and if you put it into relative terms, it's quite expensive. Most so something like, let's say, a pint. Most places won't serve a pint though. It'll be like a 400 ml glass, so it's a little bit less than a pint, but bigger than a bottle of beer. Will be anywhere between 6 and like 9 euros, which is like $7.50 to $10 for a glass of beer.
Yeah.
It's pretty, and the rage here is double dry hop, double everything. So it's most of those beers are going to be at like 8-9 euros a glass, or like 140 to 160 a keg, plus the sales tax here, which is astronomical, 24% sales tax.
Holy shit!
It's out of control.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a real suppressor to the economic viability of this entire country, that everyone's paying 24% on everything.
On everything. That's insane. What's the tipping culture like?
Oh, it's very European in the sense that like someone will leave like a euro or two. It has nothing to do with percentages of sales the way it is in the States.
Yeah.
It's grown a little bit to be a little more normal to leave tips, but it's almost like no matter what the bill is, it'll be a euro or two for the interaction. So bartenders, if it's a real high volume bar, which there aren't that many at the moment, bartenders can walk away with like 30-40 euros in tips on the night, which is pretty good. And here it's great. That's like the amount of money they made on their wage for the night.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not something to be relied on. The way when I was working in New York, you worked for tips. You didn't work for your wage.
Yeah. You walk out with like $300-500 a night or something.
Yeah, and when you got the paycheck, like that was your extra spending. Like, oh, cool, I got an extra $200 in my paycheck. Like whatever on my paycheck, is I come here for the tips.
So what does the grain cost look like over there? Is it? I mean, I guess you're in Europe though, so it's But what does the grain cost look like?
It's not. I don't think it's that crazy. Although I guess I don't have that much experience with other prices or that many years in the business, I guess. But we do have a local maltster. Greek maltster, in other words, who's the most affordable, of course, and that's usually about a euro or like a euro 10 cents per kilo. So that's going to be something, let's say, like
that's great.
Yeah, like it's pretty reasonable, right?
Yeah, that's like what, 2.2 pounds? Is that what a kilogram is?
Like $1.80.
Yeah, it's like 40. Yes. That's crazy. That's way cheaper.
Yeah. And I can't say that it's like the highest, that particular isn't necessarily the highest quality, but it gets the job done on your basic pale ales and your basic, wheat percentages. He does do some caramels, and he's got a carapils. But a lot of my recipes, I still use Maris Otter or Golden Promise. And actually, I can open up right now and tell you, we just bought two 55-pound bags of Maris Otter. Literally, while I was talking to you, my wife went and picked them up.
Cool.
And so I can tell you right now, I paid €1.73 per kilo. So that's like, let's say $2 maybe for 2 pounds. So that's like $1 a pound ish.
Yeah.
But again, plus 24% on top of that, which is
There you go. Okay. That makes a little more sense.
So, in total for two 55-pound sacks, I paid €107. So like $120 for two 55-pound bags, which would be 25 kilo sacks, which is about 55 pounds.
That seems more in line with, or at least like what you see here in the States. You said that there's a seasonal trade there. What's the season?
Well, Greece overall, like its main moneymaker as a country is its tourist season, which is pretty much like its widest, expanse might be April to November. But most places probably experience something more like June to the end of September as being like the tourist season. And a lot of the islands like completely live off of that chunk of time.
I bet.
Cantina culture and seaside tavern kind of culture, where because the Greeks themselves have a deep, long culture of going on vacation for like 2 weeks in the summer. So the islands fill up with Greeks for like a month, aside from all of the Europeans and Americans that come, from June all the way to the end of, or into mid-fall, let's say. So there's tons of traffic coming through for those few months. And there's little pitfalls to that too. I mean, just like around the world, a lot of things have been consolidated. So a lot of the places that look like independent little places, they're actually owned by some parent company that are just kind of sucking the money out of the economy. So it looks like, oh, look at all this economic activity happening. The end of that is that the money's not going to stay here.
Yeah.
And over time, that's not helpful at all. Yeah,
that's interesting. There's the beach here in Texas is nothing to write home about, but there's a place called Corpus Christi that is, on the beach and very much a summer tourist destination. And I've gone there my whole life during the summers. And then I just think about like how dead it gets during the winter there. And I just like, how do you, if you're a service industry person, like, I don't know how you survive.
Yeah, there was an issue with the bar that we had now, past tense, was, leases are 12 months, like it or not. So you have a tourist season of 2, 3, 4 months. You're banking on making enough in that season to live off of year round, but to pay that lease for the rest of the year too. So, it puts a lot of pressure on those few months to bank as much as you can. And it comes with so many difficulties because once you just get this sudden crush of people, which means you need staff to handle all of that. So money's just flying out the register to handle the business that's coming in. And at the end of the summer, you're just kind of hoping like that there's enough, couple thousand to, bridge the gap from, let's say November all the way over to April again.
Do you just shut down during those months, or do you stay
a lot of
open
places do just straight up shut down? It so happened that we were, we ran that during COVID. So we went down to the island and ended up spending most of COVID down on the island, which was a lot more chill. And we were opening like Thursday, Friday, Saturdays, doing takeaway. I had a little kitchen. I was in the kitchen the whole time. One of the reasons we let go of the bar was that I was the only guy in the kitchen for 4 years straight. And then finally the brewery started, moving along more steadily. And it was like, I can't brew on a consistent basis and every single night for 4 months straight go up and cook burgers and fries.
Yeah.
But we made it through COVID, drips and drabs of doing like takeaway burgers and fries. And we we were filling up sort of growler bottles that they weren't glass bottles. We just found like 1.5 liter plastic bottles, and we were like, well, it's kind of a growler, fill them up.
Yeah.
People were coming by them. They were taking them home, and it kind of got us through. It didn't necessarily pay the bills, but it helped to at least cushion some of the losses, I guess. At the time.
Well, this stream is also coming to an end. But before we go, I had one question about Greek culture in general. Are gyros a common staple?
Like money?
No, like gyros, Gyros.
Gyros. Gyros. Yeah. I mean, here, what we would call souvlaki in the United States, which is just the meat on a stick. That's what they call everything here is souvlaki, and it's either wrapped or not wrapped. So a gyro here is just referring to that there's slices of meat on like a rotating cooker. It's kind of like how we have pizza everywhere in the States.
Yeah.
There's souvlaki everywhere. It's like, it's your go-to kind of cheap, quick, you grab 2 of them. They're usually about, they're kind of the size of like maybe a burrito here.
Yeah.
Where in the States, they're gigantic things you can't get your mouth around. Here, they're like little handheld, almost like really big taco size.
Do they have, I don't know if you've heard of the company Kronos?
Yeah.
You familiar? Yeah. Is that what a lot of like places serve, is just like the mass produced gyro meat, or is it?
Here, it's not like a big hunk of like hot dog the way it is in the States. It's actually a slice of pork, and it looks tantalizing when you walk by it. It's like all browned and gorgeous and dripping with pork fat, and you can tell it's meat. It's slices of meat run through with this big rod, where it's not like that weird produced like hunk of stuff that nobody really knows what it is. It's not that.
Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to clarify. Sorry to end this conversation on a gyro question, but anyways, Jonathan, thanks for jumping on this call, man. I had a blast. Learned a lot.
Man. Time flew, man. It was really nice chatting with you. It was easy talking to you, man.
Yeah, you as well. Good luck on all your ventures there. Let me know any updates or anything, or maybe we'll do this again in the future and see how things are going out there.
I'd love to reverse engines a little bit too, because one of my side goals for 2024 is to focus a little bit more on things like doing a YouTube channel and doing more social media stuff, because it's like right there in front of me. So it's so much stupid to be doing videos. And so it'd be fun. I hope I can get my butt in gear and kind of organize myself, and it'd be fun to sort of flip it around. But
man, let's do it.
I'd love to come back and chat with you again for your channel as well. I'm a supporter of your channel. I'll be watching the videos, man. I hope it does well. It seems like it's taken off all right.
I appreciate it, man. Well, thanks again for jumping on here, and have a great day. We'll talk soon.
Likewise, man. Stay in touch.
Take care.
Bye.
So that's the interview. I've done a few of these Brewery One-on-One episodes on the channel, and unfortunately, it seems like they don't get a ton of love, not a ton of views, and that could be because they're so long. Also, the Zoom video quality is always pretty poor, so maybe that's an indicator as well. But I have not decided whether I'm going to continue to do these or not, or if I should start a separate channel just for interviewing folks. But let me know in the comments if you have any feedback, if you like these, if you find these valuable. I always get some nuggets out of them, talking to other brewery owners that own and operate small breweries like myself, and learning about the marketing challenges, the economics of different areas. So I find these very valuable, but it is ultimately about the consumer. So please let me know what you think about these Brewery One-on-Ones. And if anybody's interested in scheduling one, feel free to email me at andy@tanglefootbrewing.com, and we will get an interview going. But thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.